How are you? You are mostly welcome in our session. Before we start with something which I prepared to you on today, let me remind you some issues which you have discussed on the last period, on the last session. On the last period, we have started on the subject which known as literature in English. And I do remember we have discussed about the first issue which you have discussed on the previous period. We looked the meaning of literature. And in the meaning of literature, we do agree that there is no one or single definition of literature which has been accepted by several or most of scholars. So due to that, make to have several or many definitions of literature. So I decided to select only 4 definitions of literature, and also I told you that these are part of them, so you may observe in different materials so as to get those definitions or other definitions which have not appeared according to our discussion as we discussed on the last period. Also, thereafter, we discussed the key terms or basic terms which found in the definition of literature. And here, there are several words. When you can look or when you can observe in each definition of literature, you will meet with several words which has been repeated in more than one. So due to that, make us to see or to discuss those words which can be appeared or which has been appeared in more than one in each definition of literature. Also, after that, we ended looking about those issues. So today, I decided to discuss about functions or roles or importance of literature. And I decided to use these several vocabularies. That's why there are some students who study about only one word, that is function. So when they can be, or when we can meet with other word apart from function, they fail to tackle a question like that. So I decided to use those words so as to enable you to know what are the words apart from function which can be asked or which can be used on the certain question. So, functions or roles or importance of literature. So, when you speak about literature, it has its roles to play in the society. Also, when you speak about literature, it has its advantages that can be benefited by those people who are reading, who are watching, or who are listening a certain literary work. So, we can start with a first importance or a first function of literature, which is it educates. So it educates people in the society. So the first function of literature is that it educates the people in the society. What does it mean? We have several types of, or we have several literary works which we do normally, or read, or listen, or watch. So after reading, we can get some lesson about those issues which you have learned. So here it creates sense of awareness and self-activation, self-awareness and self-actualization or activation. So there are some people who are so ignorant about a certain problem. So they can remove their amount of ignorance which they have after reading or listening or reading or listening or watching any kind of literary work. So after reading, they can get a knowledge about something. So they can get knowledge how can it solve the problems which do appear in their daily life. So that makes us to say that literature educates the society. So we may get a lot of knowledge, experiences about different activities or how to perform a certain something. So literature has that role that can be played in the society or where that kind of literary work has been intended to be delivered. So that is the first function of literature. And the second one is it entertains the people. It entertains the people. So we have several. We have many literary works which do help us to enjoy ourselves. And a good example of it, most of youth they listen a lot of songs which has been sung by different artists. So when they listen those songs which has been sung by different artists, entertain themselves. So when they think that they have several sets, stories which has been experienced to themselves, so soon after listening that, they can enjoy. And you are not, or you can't blame those artists who compose a certain song which entertain the people. So don't expect that any kind of literary work I can get a message. No, that's why one among the function of literature is that it can entertain only, that can stand there so as to present its role of literature. So here we can say that through the use of aesthetic pressure that stimulated the sense of enjoyment through reading, listening, etc., or among others. So we normally enjoy ourselves through listening several songs, or also reading different stories which has been written by different authors. Also, we can enjoy ourselves through attending different activities that are being involved on case of literature. We watch study shows and among others, but these are some of them. So we do enjoy ourselves when we watch, listening, or read any kind of literary work. So that is second importance, or second functioning of literature. Also, the third one is it develops the language. So you cannot separate literature with language. That's why, if you do remember, on the first period we discussed a lot about what are the functions of literature, what are the functions of language in the literature. That's why in most of the definition of literature, you may see that in a work of art that uses language creatively, or that uses artistic language. So you cannot say this is a literary work without using language. So due to that, we may learn language through those or in different literary works which has been composed by different composers or authors or artists, and among others. So we may learn a language. And a good example of it, when you are reading any kind of book like a novel or a play or a short story, when you are reading on that book, you will meet with vocabularies which you are not familiar. So when you can cite those vocabularies, you may use dictionaries so as to get its meaning. So after that, you can gain vocabularies that concern on that language. So due to that, make us to say that we cannot, or we learn language through a lot of literary works. And a good example of it, or a vivid example of that, we have several songs in our country which has been composed by different artists. So you may see a lot of youth use some words which has been used at a certain song. And a good example of it, I can say that there are some words which do normally are used by youth. That's why it tries to speak about issues that is very, very, very important or enjoyable to the most of youth. So that is another function of literature. So we may learn language by using literature or any kind of literary work. Through using language as medium of presentation, the people can develop communication skills. So when we are reading any kind of literary work, we can develop a communication skill which is, or specifically of it is reading skills. That's why reading skills is one among of communication skills. So in even others, even listening skills. If we are listening different songs or other literary works through listening, so we may learn, we may improve our communication skills that can enable us to use or to speak a language accordingly, or through observing those regulations according to a certain language. Also, another function of literature is that it liberates people physically or mentally. Physically or mentally. I can start here by briefing you about physical issues. How literature can liberate us physically. If you are so tired due to those activities which you do at everyday life, so when you want to rest, you may use any kind of literary work so as to make your body to be physically through listening or watching. That's why when we are trying to rest at our home or at where you are, we can listen songs so as to boost or to make our body to be physically fit. Also, also mentally. So here, according to the psychologists, try to put literature as one among of different ways which many people use so as to liberate themselves. That's why a good example of it, there are some songs which emphasize people not give up in their life. So when you can listen a kind of song or certain song, and that song or the content which has been included on that song tries to emphasize you not to give up in the life. So thereafter, if you can take those procedures so as to be engaged in agricultural activities or any economic activities, you can improve your life. You can make your life change from the low level up to the high level. So due to that, literature also can liberate people due to the problems which have been affected them, or if you have affected by HIV and AIDS. When you can listen or reading or watching several literary works, you can get life expectancy. You will say, that's why if you have been affected by any disease like HIV and AIDS, there are a lot of possibilities that can enable me to continue to live. That's why that expectancy which you may get, it can come from directly to any kind of literary work. So that makes us to say that literature liberates people in the society. Also, it criticizes people in the society. Another function of literature is that it criticizes people in the society. Here, a main issue which you have to take into consideration is that any kind of literary work, or most of literary works, try to make people or to criticize according to their behaviors, according to their manners, according to each and everything which do not accepted at a given society. So a good example of it, if you are being engaged in the issue of drunkenness, so when you are reading or watching any kind of literary work, you will meet an event that does similar as have been affected you. So thereafter, you may see that if I can be engaged on that, there are negative impact which can be occurred in my body, or even other people who are surrounding me and among others. So due to that, make literature to criticize people. That's why if you are doing any kind of behavior that cannot be accepted at the society, like prostitution, I do mean commercial sex workers, also the issue of social cultural practice which are being practiced by several societies in Africa and among others. So that try to criticize. So you are wrong. If you are being engaged on that behavior, you are wrong. You have to do this and this. So it is just like guidance that is tried to be given to you. So due to that, it try to criticize about what you are doing or what you are observing in your life. So that makes us to say that literature criticizes people in the society. If you are a reader and you are trying to lend or to receive corruption, we say that you are not allowed to be engaged on such behavior. So that is make us to say that literature criticizes people. Also, another function of literature is that it expresses people's culture. One among element of the culture is language. So every literary work should use language. So if has been used a certain language, that makes us to say that is a culture of a certain society. If any kind of literary work has been used in Kiswahili, we do know that this belongs to the people who live at the Swahili community. So literature tries to give us or to tell us about how people do engage according to their norms, according to their values, according to their each and everything which they do in their activities. So, on this point, e.g. norms, values, beliefs, language, and abandon negative ones. So here, literature try to include or to touch in every aspect of life, economically, socially, and politically. So, and I can take here as an example those issues which are being included on social activities, or social issues like blood price, female genital mutilation, or women circumcision, the issue of forced marriage, and among others. So these are issues which are being consigned, and if we are reading or watching any kind of literary work and has been intended to be delivered in the African societies, should it talk about that issues? Should it concentrate? Should it focus on that issues? That's why there are several African societies who are being engaged on such issues as I mentioned. Also, it influences towards changes. Also, literature tries to influence people all people who are so tired or who have given up so as or due to different situation which has been occurring to them. Literature has its role to play so as to influence people, so as to make people aware about their rights, to know their what are supposed to be done by them. So on this point, people may be influenced to act or do things in good ways. So when you are watching different movies, when we are watching different movies, there are several characters who are being picked on that literary work. So there are characters who try to be distributed good behaviors. So if we are audience on that literary work, or if we are watchers on that literary work, we may learn. We expect to do as a certain character did. So due to that, it can help us to influence, to add the changes in our lifestyle, in our life, or in our daily life. So that's another function of literature. Also, literature, it unites people. We do normally in our societies, there are several issues which occur, like political instability. People are trying to be, government tries to betray its people, and among others. So literature also has its role so as to unite these people, so as to stand as a one thing. And a good example of it, when we were fighting for our independence in Tanganyika, literature has its role which has been played so as to unite, so as to make awareness about what are the advantages, what are the benefits which can be got soon after people trying to show or to go against colonialists. So due to that, literature can unite the people and stand as a one thing in any struggle. So that is another function or roles of literature in our society. And the last one is literature also creates employment opportunities. And a good example of it, there are several artists who have been employed themselves, and due to that, when they tried to expand their labels, also there are other uses who have been employed on that issues. So due to this, literature also can be used to create several employment opportunities. Also, there are some people who are being engaged on writing of several literary works. So they use that opportunity as a place of creating their employment. So due to that, make us to say that literature also creates employment opportunities in our society. So a good example of it, and if we want to prove those issues which we are talking about or concern, or which are talking about it, on that last point, you will see how most of the people who are being engaged in literary works, and they have tried to improve or to change their life and the life of others who are surrounding them. So those which we are discussing are the functions or roles or importances of literature in our society. So I want to say something on that. So you have to take into consideration that literature has a great role in our society. That's why, as we have discussed here, after looking those functions or roles of literature, now we are going to discuss forms or types of literature. Types of literature. There are only two types of literature, which are oral literature and written literature. And when we are talking about oral literature, it simply means that it is a kind of literature which is transformed through words of mouth. And there are several examples of oral literature, and some of them are sayings, proverbs, folktale, and among others. And I think those types of oral literature on the next period, I think you'll discuss one after another. But these are some examples which I tried to select so as to give you or to enable you to know what does it mean, or what are the several types of written, oral literature. So oral literature should be transformed through words of mouth. If I'm trying to give you a certain story which talks about a certain event which has been occurred during such time, and I use the words of mouth, that is one among of oral literature. And the second type of literature is written literature. Written literature is a kind of literature which is transformed through in written form. So when you speak about written literature, is a kind of literature which is transformed through written form. So we must read it, and there is a certain story or a poem or any story which has been written. If has been written on the paper, and people do read on that issue, we say that is written literature. That's why it has been written on the certain paper or book or among other materials which can be used to write it. So here I tried to give you a brief sentences about this oral literature. So therefore, after short explanations about these two types of literature, let us now go directly to the differences between oral literature and written literature. How do these two types of literature differ one after another or each other? So these are the differences, or how can we distinguish between written literature and oral literature? A first difference of these two types of literature is through presentation. So a first distinctive feature between oral literature and the written literature is through presentation. Written literature is presented through or in written form, and the oral literature is transformed through or by using the word of mouth. So that is the first distinctive feature between oral literature and the written literature. And the second one is through preparation. Through preparation, oral literature does not need a lot of time or a long time. That's why you can decide where you are and you can give it. But in written literature, you should have a lot of time so as to prepare each and everything that can be used when you are writing or composing a certain literary work. Like if you have a pen, an exercise book, or any papers, and among others. So these are the issues which need or demand a lot of time. So that makes us to say that oral literature does differ with oral literature due to how it's prepared. That is second one. And the third one is through participation. Oral literature, any kind of oral literature needs participation between artist and the audience who are listening on that. But in written literature, the author of that book you cannot see physically. That's why it has been written by a certain author who are far away, so you cannot see him or her who has wrote that kind of literary work. So due to that, make us to say that that is another distinctive feature or difference between oral literature and the written literature. And another one is through honor. Any kind of oral literature, oral literature is owned by community or is owned by communally. That's why there is no only one who owns that kind of literary work. But written literature is a property of a writer or an author of that kind of literary work. So that is another difference between these two types of literature. Also, an issue of through costs. All literature does not need any kind of costs. That's why you may use your mouth so as to deliver it to your audience. But in written literature, it is too costly. It is too costful. That's why you should have a money so as to buy some issues or materials which you have or which you may use when you are composing a kind of literary work. So that is another difference between these two types of literature. Also, another one is through changes. In any kind of literary works which is oral literature, which can be delivered to the audience through words of mouth, allows a person who are trying to deliver it to do any changes where there are several mistakes which has been included in that, so he or she may use or may correct those mistakes which has been occurred on that. But in written literature, you cannot do any kind of changes. So you must wait until to the another edition so as to make a lot of mistakes which have been appeared on that work. So that is another difference between these two types of literature. Also, another one is through in type. So all literature has several types of. There are several types of oral literature, but in written literature there are only 4 types of written literature, which are play or dramas. That is the first, and the second one is a novel, and the third one is poetry, and the last one is short stories. So these are 4 types of written literature. But when you can trace back on all literature, there are so many of them. So that is another difference between oral literature and written literature. Also, another one is through in its type. I mean that another issue which we have already discussed. So another difference between these two types of literature is that through in its characters. So all literature uses several types of characters. So those characters can be animals, human being, and anything. But when you can come back on written literature, most of characters who are being included on that may be, or most of them are human beings. So that is another difference between these two types of literature. That's why in all literature there are a lot of characters, like the names of animals, and I think you have listened any kind of all literature which uses a lot of characters who are animals or trees, big trees, stonies. So these can be used as the characters in the literary work. So that is an end of our period. So let us take a homework here so as to discuss. And this task which I prepared to you needs you to prepare or to give several examples of these two types of literature as we discussed on our session. So the question states that list down 4 examples of both oral and written literature which you know in each one. So in each type of literature, as we have discussed, you have to provide 4 examples of oral literature and 4 examples of written literature. Thank you for listening to me. See you again.